Before we begin this tale of honor, sacrifice, and mystical bonds forged in the frost of the North, please take a moment to show your support for our channel. Hit that like button if you enjoy stories of Viking courage and Norse magic. And don't forget to comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from, whether you're in the frozen fjords of Norway, the bustling streets of New York, or anywhere in between. Your support helps us bring these ancient tales to life. Now, let us journey back to a time when dragons soared through mist-covered mountains, and heroes were forged in the fires of destiny. The morning mist clung to the mountainside like the breath of sleeping giants, and through this ethereal veil, Aegir Ironson made his way up the treacherous path toward the ancient cave. His boots, wrapped in thick leather and fur, found purchase on the frost-slicked stones as he climbed higher into the realm where few mortals dared to tread. Behind him, the village of Ravenshollow lay nestled in the valley below, its thatched roofs barely visible through the swirling fog that seemed to dance between the towering pine trees. Aegir paused at a rocky outcrop, his breath forming small clouds in the bitter morning air. At 28 winters old, he stood tall and broad-shouldered, his auburn beard braided with small iron rings that caught what little light filtered through the mist. His father's sword, Frostbite, hung at his side, a blade forged by the greatest smiths of his clan and tempered in the ice-cold waters of the northern fjords. The weapon had tasted the blood of many enemies, but today it might face something far more dangerous than any mortal foe. The village elders had gathered 3 nights ago around the great fire in the longhouse, their weathered faces grave with concern as they spoke of the ancient terror that slumbered in the mountain's heart. For generations, the great worm had rested in the deepest caverns, its presence both a curse and a blessing to the people of Ravenshollow. The dragon's magical influence kept the village hidden from the worst of the winter storms, and its mere existence deterred most raiders and invaders from venturing too close to their lands. Yet now, with spring approaching and trade routes opening, whispers had reached them of a massive warband gathering in the eastern territories, warriors who cared nothing for legends and myths, who would burn Ravenshollow to ash without hesitation. "The only way to truly protect our people," old Gunnar Whitecrow had declared, his voice carrying the weight of 7 decades, "is to claim the dragon's hoard for ourselves. With such wealth, we could hire mercenaries, build great walls, and forge weapons that would make even the fiercest warriors think twice before attacking our home. But claiming a dragon's treasure meant one thing: killing the dragon." As Aegir continued his ascent, memories of his younger brother Ulf flooded his mind like a tide of bittersweet emotion. Ulf had been everything Aegir was not. Where Aegir was measured and thoughtful, Ulf had been impulsive and bold. Where Aegir preferred to observe and plan, Ulf would charge headfirst into any adventure or challenge that presented itself. The younger brother had possessed an almost magical connection with all living creatures. Birds would land on his shoulders without fear, wild wolves would approach him with something resembling affection, and even the most stubborn horses would calm under his gentle touch. 3 winters passed. During a hunting expedition in the far northern territories, Ulf had ventured too close to a crevasse, weakened by an early thaw. The ice had given way beneath his feet, and despite Aegir's desperate attempts to reach him, his brother had vanished into the depths of the frozen chasm. They had searched for days, but the spring melt had filled the crevasse with rushing water, making any rescue attempt impossible. Aegir had returned to Ravenshollow alone, carrying only Ulf's favorite bone knife and a heart heavy with guilt and sorrow. Now, as he approached the dragon's lair, Aegir could almost hear his brother's voice on the wind, not urging him forward to glory and gold, but cautioning him to consider the consequences of his actions. Ulf had always possessed an wisdom that belied his young age, an understanding that every action rippled outward like stones thrown into still water. The cave entrance loomed before him, a massive archway carved by centuries of wind and weather into the living rock of the mountain. Ancient runes had been etched around the opening by long-dead skalds and vulvas, their meanings lost to time, but their power still palpable in the electric feeling that made the hair on Aegir's arms stand on end. The air here felt thick and warm, as if the mountain itself was breathing, and a faint luminescence seemed to emanate from the depths of the cavern, the telltale glow of dragonfire. Aegir drew frostbite from its sheath, the blade singing softly as it tasted the mystical air of the dragon's domain. The sword had been his father's before him, and his grandfather's before that, passed down through 5 generations of the Ironson line. The steel gleamed with an inner light, and along its fuller ran engravings in the old tongue: honor before gold, life before glory, family above all. As he stepped across the threshold into the dragon's realm, Aegir felt the temperature rise noticeably. The rough stone floor was worn smooth by the passage of countless years, and here and there scattered coins and precious gems caught the ethereal light, small treasures that had fallen from the great hoard deeper within the mountain. The walls were covered in scorch marks from dragonfire, creating patterns that seemed almost artistic in their arrangement, as if the great beast had been decorating its home with controlled bursts of flame. The deeper Aegir ventured into the mountain, the more overwhelming the dragon's presence became. He could hear it now, a deep, rhythmic breathing that resonated through the stone like distant thunder. Each exhale sent warm air rushing through the tunnels, carrying with it the scent of sulfur, ancient gold, and something else, something strangely familiar that Aegir couldn't quite identify. After what felt like hours of careful navigation through winding passages and vast chambers, Aegir finally reached the heart of the mountain. The cavern that opened before him was so vast that its ceiling disappeared into shadow high above. Massive stalactites hung down like the teeth of some primordial giant, and the floor was carpeted with the greatest treasure hoard he had ever imagined. Gold coins from a dozen different kingdoms lay scattered like fallen leaves. Precious gems the size of a man's fist caught and reflected the ambient light, and weapons and armor from every corner of the known world created small mountains of steel and silver. And there, in the center of it all, lay the dragon. Aegir had expected a monster, a terrible serpent with scales like black iron, claws that could rend steel, and eyes like burning coals. What he found instead took his breath away. The dragon was magnificent, certainly, easily the length of 3 longships, and possessed of wings that could blot out the sun when spread. But its scales were not the dull black of nightmare stories. They shimmered with deep blues and greens, like the depths of the ocean under starlight. Its breathing was peaceful, almost meditative, and even in sleep there was something noble and ancient about its bearing. Most surprising of all was the dragon's face. Even relaxed in slumber, its features held an intelligence and wisdom that spoke of centuries of accumulated knowledge and experience. This was not some mindless beast guarding its hoard out of simple greed. This was a creature of profound depth and understanding. As Aegir crept closer, his boots silent on the sea of gold coins, he raised frostbite above his head. One quick thrust to the base of the skull, and the deed would be done. The village would be safe, his people would be wealthy beyond measure, and his name would be sung in the halls of heroes for generations to come. His muscles tensed, ready to strike the killing blow that would solve all of Ravenhollow's problems in a single moment. But then the dragon's eye opened. It was not the burning coal of legend, but rather a deep, intelligent blue that seemed to hold depths like the ocean itself. The great eye focused on Aegir with neither anger nor fear, but with something that looked almost like recognition. The dragon did not move, did not threaten or posture. It simply looked at him with an expression that seemed impossibly familiar. In that moment, Aegir felt something deep within his soul rebel against the action he was about to take. This creature had done no harm to his village. Indeed, its presence had protected them for generations. It slumbered peacefully in its mountain home, bothering no one, threatening no one. What right did he have to end its ancient life simply for the promise of gold? "I cannot do this," Aegir whispered, his voice echoing softly in the vast chamber. "You have done no wrong, Ancient One. You deserve to sleep in peace." The dragon's eye seemed to brighten with something that might have been gratitude, and then slowly, gently, the great lid closed once more. The worm's breathing resumed its steady rhythm, and Aegir carefully backed away, sheathing frostbite as he went. The return journey through the mountain passages felt different somehow, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had failed in his mission, but he had succeeded in something more important. He had remained true to the values his father had taught him, the principles carved into his very soul, like the runes on his sword. When Aegir emerged from the cave, the sun was setting behind the western peaks, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. The mist had cleared, and he could see Ravenshollow spread out below him like a child's toy village. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and he could hear the faint sounds of evening activities drifting up on the cool air. It looked so peaceful, so vulnerable. As he made his way back down the mountain path, Aegir's mind was already working on alternative solutions to their problem. Perhaps they could negotiate with the approaching warband or find another way to strengthen their defenses. The dragon's horde would have solved everything quickly, but quick solutions often came with costs that were not immediately apparent. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky when Aegir finally reached the village outskirts. The longhouse glowed with warm firelight, and he could hear the voices of the elders raised in discussion. No doubt they were planning how to divide the dragon's treasure, or perhaps debating what magnificent weapons and fortifications they would build with their newfound wealth. Aegir paused at the threshold of the longhouse, steeling himself for the disappointed and angry reactions that would surely greet his return. Through the partially open door, he could see Gunnar Whitecrow gesturing emphatically, while the other elders nodded along with his words. Their faces were bright with anticipation and hope. "The boy should have returned by now," Gunnar was saying. "Dragon slaying is not a task that requires much time. A quick thrust of the blade, and the deed is done. Soon we will have enough gold to make Ravenshollow the strongest village in all the Northlands." Another elder, Harold Ravencrest, stroked his grey beard thoughtfully. "We must be careful how we spend this wealth," he cautioned. "Gold is powerful, but it can also bring unwanted attention. Perhaps we should hide the greatest treasures and use only what we need for immediate defenses." "Bah!" scoffed Gunnar. "Why hide our strength? Let all the world know that Ravenshollow is under the protection of warriors rich enough to hire entire armies. No one will dare attack us when they see what we are capable of." Aegir took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The conversation stopped immediately as all eyes turned toward him. The elders' faces were expectant, eager to hear tales of dragon slaying and to begin planning their new golden age. Instead, they saw a young warrior with empty hands and a troubled expression. "Well," Gunnar demanded, rising from his seat by the fire, "where is the proof of your victory? Where is the dragon's head, or at least some token from its hoard?" Aegir met the old man's gaze steadily. "The dragon still lives," he said simply, "and it will continue to live if I have anything to say about it." The silence that followed was deafening. Harold's mouth fell open in shock, while another elder, Eric Stormborn, actually gasped aloud. Gunnar's face went through several different shades of red before settling on a deep crimson that matched his anger. You didn't kill it?" Gunnar sputtered. "You had the perfect opportunity. The beast was asleep, helpless, and you chose to let it live." "I did," Aegir confirmed, his voice calm despite the storm he knew was coming. "The dragon has done us no harm. Indeed, its presence has protected our village for generations. I would not slay an innocent creature, no matter how much gold it guards." Eric Stormborn leaped to his feet, his weathered hand moving instinctively to the axe at his belt. "Innocent? It's a dragon, boy, a monster out of the oldest nightmares, and you call it innocent." "I call it what I saw," Aegir replied firmly. "An ancient being, sleeping peacefully in its mountain home, threatening no one. If we are to defend Ravenshollow, we must find another way, a way that does not require us to become the very monsters we claim to stand against." The argument that followed was fierce and long, with voices raised and harsh words spoken that would not soon be forgotten. Some of the younger warriors seemed to understand Aegir's position, while others sided firmly with the elder's pragmatic approach. By the time the Longhouse finally fell silent, the village was deeply divided, and Aegir found himself something of an outcast among his own people. As the weeks passed, preparations for the expected invasion continued, but with much less confidence than before. Weapons were sharpened, defenses were strengthened, and watchposts were established on all the approaches to the valley. But everyone knew that without the dragon's horde to buy mercenaries or forge superior weapons, their chances against a large warband were slim at best. Aegir threw himself into the defensive preparations with a dedication that bordered on obsession. If his decision to spare the dragon had cost his people their best chance at survival, then he would do everything in his power to find another solution. He worked tirelessly on fortifications, organized training sessions for the younger warriors, and even ventured to neighboring villages to seek alliances and aid. But late at night, when the village slept, and he stood alone on the walls keeping watch, Aegir often found himself looking up at the mountain where the dragon slumbered. Sometimes he thought he could see a faint glow emanating from the cave entrance, and more than once he could have sworn he heard something that sounded almost like singing carried on the night wind, not the harsh roar of a monster, but something beautiful and mournful and strangely familiar. The dreams began about a month after his encounter with the dragon. At first they were fragmentary and confusing, images of soaring through clouds, of seeing the world spread out below like a vast tapestry, of fire that brought warmth instead of destruction. But gradually the dreams became more coherent and more disturbing. He began to dream of a younger version of himself, standing in a snow-covered forest with his brother Ulf. But in these dreams, when the ice gave way and Ulf fell into the crevasse, Aegir could see what happened next. He dreamed of Ulf falling not into water but into a vast underground chamber filled with ancient magic. He dreamed of his brother's broken body being touched by forces older than human memory, of transformation and rebirth, of a soul too pure and good to simply fade away, being given a new form and a new purpose. And always, the dreams ended with a pair of deep blue eyes that looked at him with love and recognition and infinite sadness. Aegir tried to dismiss these visions as nothing more than guilt and wishful thinking. Ulf was dead. He had seen him fall, had searched desperately for any sign of hope, had mourned his loss for 3 long winters. Dragons were real, certainly, but they were not the reincarnated souls of lost loved ones. That was the stuff of children's stories and old wives' tales. But the dreams persisted, and with them came a growing certainty that his decision to spare the dragon had been about more than simple mercy. Something deeper was at work here, something connected to forces and mysteries that mortal minds were not meant to fully comprehend. The first scouts from the Eastern Warband arrived on a cold morning in early spring, just as the last of the winter snow was beginning to melt in the valleys. They rode hard horses and carried weapons that gleamed with fresh oil and sharpening. These were not raiders looking for easy plunder. These were professional warriors, well-equipped and disciplined, the kind of enemies that could overwhelm even a well-defended village through sheer numbers and superior tactics. Aegir watched them from his position on the walls as they surveyed Ravenshollow's defenses, noting weak points and calculating angles of attack. Their leader was a massive man, with ritual scars covering his arms and face, riding a black stallion that looked like it had been bred for war. Even at a distance, Aegir could see the cold intelligence in the man's eyes as he planned the destruction of everything Aegir held dear. That night, the warband made camp just beyond arrow range, their fires visible like malevolent stars in the darkness. The villagers huddled in their homes, whispering prayers to the old gods and sharpening whatever weapons they could find. In the longhouse, the elders held council with the village's warriors, but their discussions were grim and their options limited. "They outnumber us 3-1, Harold reported after the final scout had returned. "And their equipment is superior to ours in every way. They have siege engines, professional archers and cavalry that could break our lines with a single charge." Gunner Whitecrow glared accusingly at Aegir from across the fire. "If someone had not let his conscience override his duty," the old man said bitterly, "we would have had the resources to hire our own army by now. Instead, we face annihilation because one young fool chose to spare a monster." "The dragon is not our enemy," Aegir replied, though he felt the weight of every eye in the longhouse upon him, "and I still believe there was honor in sparing an innocent life." "Honor?" Eric Stormborn spat into the fire, causing the flames to hiss and spit. "Will honor feed our children when their fathers are dead? Will honor rebuild our homes when they are nothing but ash and cinders? You may have doomed us all with your misplaced mercy." The debate continued through the night, but no amount of arguing could change their situation. Come the morning, the warband would attack, and Ravenshollow would likely fall. The only question was how many of the village's defenders would die in the attempt to protect their families and homes. As dawn approached, Aegir found himself once again standing on the walls, looking out at the enemy camp where warriors were already stirring and preparing for battle. But his gaze kept drifting upward, toward the mountain peak where the dragon slumbered in its ancient cave. If only there were some way to wake the great beast, to convince it that its long-time protectees were in mortal danger. But dragons were not allies that could be summoned or bargained with. They were forces of nature, as unpredictable as storms and as dangerous as avalanches. The sun crested the eastern mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. In the enemy camp, horns began to sound, deep, brazen notes that carried across the valley like the voices of war itself. The attack was beginning. The thunder of hoofbeats shook the ground beneath Ravenshollow as the eastern warband launched their assault with the fury of a winter storm. Aegir stood atop the wooden palisade, frostbite gleaming in the morning light as he watched the enemy cavalry charge across the valley floor like a dark tide of death and destruction. The riders wore mail and leather, their weapons catching the early sunlight as they raised their battle cries to the sky. Behind them came the infantry, disciplined warriors moving in tight formations, their shields locked together in an impenetrable wall of iron and determination. "Archers!" Aegir shouted, his voice carrying over the din of approaching battle. "Wait for my signal! Make every arrow count!" Along the walls of Ravenshollow, the village defenders took their positions with grim determination. They were farmers and craftsmen, fishermen and hunters, good people who had never expected to face professional warriors in battle for their very lives. But they were also the descendants of Vikings, men who had learned to fight before they learned to walk, and they would not surrender their homes without exacting a terrible price from their enemies. The first wave of cavalry struck the outer defenses like a hammer blow against an anvil. The wooden stakes that the villagers had planted in the approaches held briefly, channeling the attackers into narrow killing zones where the archers could make their shots count. Aegir's bowstring sang as he sent arrow after arrow into the pressing mass of enemies, each shaft finding its mark in horse or rider with deadly precision. "Hold the line!" Harold Ravencrest bellowed from his position near the main gate, his ancient sword weaving deadly patterns in the air as the first of the enemy infantry reached the walls. "For Ravenshollow! For our families!" The battle raged with increasing ferocity as the morning wore on. The defenders fought with desperate courage, but they were gradually being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. For every enemy warrior that fell to their arrows and spears, two more seemed to take his place. The professional attackers fought with mechanical precision, their formations never wavering even as men died around them. Aegir found himself in the thick of the fighting as enemy warriors scaled the walls using crude ladders and grappling hooks. His sword became an extension of his will, cutting down attackers with fluid grace, while his free hand grabbed fallen spears to hurl at the enemies still climbing toward him. The teachings of his father and grandfather flowed through his movements, generations of Viking warrior tradition, focused into every parry, every thrust, every desperate moment of the battle for survival. But even as he fought, Aegir could see that their situation was hopeless. The enemy leader, the scarred giant he had observed the night before, was directing his forces with tactical brilliance, constantly shifting his attacks to probe for weaknesses in the defenders' lines. Already, sections of the palisade were beginning to give way under the relentless assault, and it would only be a matter of time before the walls were breached entirely. "Aegir!" Eric Stormborn called out from across the battlements, his voice strained with exhaustion and pain. The older warrior was bleeding from several wounds, but still fought on with the stubborn determination of a cornered wolf. "The south wall is failing. They'll be through within the hour." Even as Eric spoke, a section of wooden stakes collapsed under the combined weight of attackers and siege engines. Enemy warriors poured through the breach like water through a broken dam, their weapons already stained with the blood of fallen defenders. The people of Raven's Hollow, warriors and civilians alike, fell back toward the center of the village, forming a desperate last stand around the longhouse where their families had taken shelter. It was then, in that moment, when all hope seemed lost, that the sky above them began to change. The morning sun disappeared behind a bank of clouds that had appeared from nowhere, and the air itself seemed to thicken with an energy that made every hair on Aegir's body stand on end. The temperature dropped suddenly and dramatically, turning the breath of every warrior on the field into visible clouds of vapor. Even the sounds of battle seemed muffled, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath in anticipation of something momentous. From high above, carried on winds that had not existed moments before, came a sound that froze the blood of every man present. It was not a roar or a scream, but something far more primal. The voice of a creature that had witnessed the birth of mountains and the death of glaciers, a sound that spoke of power beyond human comprehension and age beyond mortal reckoning. The dragon emerged from the clouds, like a vision from the oldest legends, its massive wings spread wide enough to cast shadows across the entire battlefield. The scales that Aegir had seen, shimmering with ocean colors in the cave, now blazed with inner fire, reflecting and amplifying the light until the great beast seemed to be clothed in living flame. Its eyes, those deep, intelligent blue eyes that had haunted Aegir's dreams, swept across the scene below with an expression of terrible wrath. The attacking warriors, professional fighters who had faced death in a dozen campaigns, broke and fled like children confronted by their worst nightmares. Horses reared and bolted, throwing their riders to the ground in their panic to escape. The carefully maintained formation of the infantry dissolved into chaos as men threw down their weapons and ran for their lives, abandoning their siege engines and supply wagons in their desperate flight. But the dragon's attention was not focused on the fleeing enemies. Instead, the great beast descended toward the battlefield with movements that seemed almost gentle despite its enormous size. Its landing sent tremors through the earth that could be felt for miles around, and when it folded its wings, the shadow it cast seemed to embrace the entire village of Raven's Hollow like a protective blanket. Aegir stood transfixed, his sword hanging forgotten at his side as he stared up at the magnificent creature that towered above him. This close, he could see every detail of the dragon's ancient majesty, scales that seemed to contain entire galaxies of light, claws that could rend steel like parchment, and teeth that gleamed like polished ivory. But it was the eyes that held his attention, those impossibly familiar blue depths that seemed to look directly into his soul. The dragon lowered its great head, until it was level with Aegir's position on the partially collapsed wall. When it spoke, its voice was like distant thunder mixed with the whisper of wind through mountain passes, ancient beyond measure, yet somehow warm with affection and recognition. "My brother," the dragon said, and in those two simple words, Aegir heard echoes of a voice he had thought lost forever. "You chose mercy when others would have chosen greed. You honored life when others would have chosen death. And in doing so, you awakened something that had been sleeping for far too long." The revelation hit Aegir like a physical blow, driving him to his knees on the wooden planks of the wall. The dreams, the familiar feeling in the dragon's cave, the sense of recognition that had passed between them. It all made terrible, wonderful sense now. The magic that had transformed his beloved brother had been beyond his understanding, but not beyond his acceptance. "Ulf," Aegir whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind that still swirled around the dragon's massive form. "Is it really you?" The great head nodded slowly, and when the dragon smiled, an expression that should have been terrifying on such a fearsome visage, but instead radiated warmth and love, Aegir saw the same mischievous glint that had always danced in his younger brother's eyes. "The magic that saved me also changed me," Ulf explained, his draconic voice carrying easily to every corner of the battlefield. "When I fell into that crevasse, I found myself in a cavern filled with the oldest enchantments of this land. Spells woven by the first people who walked these mountains, magic that preserves and transforms and gives new life to those whose time should not yet be ended. I have been sleeping and learning, growing and changing, waiting for the moment when I would be needed most." Around them, the villagers of Raven's Hollow emerged from their hiding places with expressions of awe and wonder. The children who had heard stories of dragons their entire lives now found themselves face to face with a legend made flesh, while their parents struggled to comprehend the miracle they were witnessing. Even Gunnar Whitecrow, his face pale with shock, approached slowly with his head bowed in something approaching reverence. "You protected them," Aegir said, understanding flooding through him like sunrise after the longest night. "All these years, it wasn't just any dragon keeping the village safe. It was you. You were watching over our people, our family." "As you watched over me when we were young," Ulf replied, a note of gentle humor creeping into his ancient voice. "Do you remember how you used to stand guard outside my room when I had nightmares? How you would tell me stories until I fell asleep again? I never stopped being your little brother, Aegir. I simply became more than I was before." The dragon's head turned to survey the scattered remnants of the warband, most of whom were still fleeing toward the eastern hills as fast as their legs could carry them. Their leader, the scarred giant who had commanded the attack with such confidence, had abandoned his black stallion and was running on foot with the rest of his demoralized warriors. "They will not return," Ulf stated with certainty. "Word will spread of what they faced here, and no other warband will dare to threaten Raven's Hollow as long as they know it is under my protection. Our people are safe now." But even as he spoke these words of reassurance, Aegir could see something changing in his brother's magnificent form. The inner fire that had blazed so brightly during the battle was beginning to dim, and there was a weariness in those familiar blue eyes that spoke of great effort and greater cost. "The transformation is not permanent," Ulf explained, somehow sensing his brother's concern. "The magic that saved me and gave me this form requires great energy to maintain. I can remain in this shape for short periods when the need is greatest, but most of the time I must return to the deeper sleep that allows my human soul to rest within this draconic body." "But you'll still be there?" Aegir asked urgently, reaching out a hand toward his transformed brother. "In the mountain, watching over us?" "Always," Ulf promised, lowering his great head until Aegir could rest his hand against the warm scales of his snout. "And now that you know the truth, you can visit me when you need to. The cave is not a dragon's lair to be feared. It is simply the home where your brother lives, in whatever form the ancient magic deems best." The dragon's form began to shimmer and fade around the edges, like heat waves rising from sun-warmed stone. But before the transformation could complete itself, Ulf turned his attention to the assembled villagers who had gathered to witness this miracle. "People of Raven's Hollow," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the village, despite its growing faintness. "I am the son of this place, the brother to your protector, and the guardian of your peace. No harm shall come to you while I draw breath, whether in this form or any other. Live well, raise your children in safety, and remember that even the greatest magic in the world is nothing compared to the bonds of love and family that tie us together." With those words, the great dragon began to dissolve into mist and starlight, its massive form becoming translucent and then invisible as it faded back into the realm of legend and dream. But even as the physical presence disappeared, Aegir could feel his brother's essence lingering in the air around them, a sense of warmth and protection that would never truly leave this place. The aftermath of the battle was unlike anything the people of Ravenshollow had ever experienced. Instead of mourning their dead and rebuilding their damaged defenses, they found themselves celebrating a miracle that had saved not only their lives, but their entire way of existence. The war band's abandoned equipment and supplies provided wealth enough to strengthen the village's defenses properly, and the story of the dragon's intervention spread quickly throughout the Northlands, ensuring that no other raiders would dare to threaten them. But for Aegir, the greatest treasure was not gold or safety. It was the knowledge that his brother lived on, transformed but not lost, watching over their people from his mountain home. In the days that followed, he found himself making regular pilgrimages up the winding path to the ancient cave, sometimes bringing news of the village, sometimes simply sitting in comfortable silence with the slumbering form of the dragon who had once been his dearest companion. The dreams continued, but now they brought comfort instead of confusion. In them, he soared alongside his brother through clouds and starlight, seeing the world spread out below like a vast tapestry of possibility. And always, when he woke from these visions, he carried with him the certainty that some bonds are too strong to be broken by death, too deep to be severed by transformation, and too pure to be diminished by time or magic or the turning of the world. The people of Ravenshollow prospered under their dragon's protection, but they never forgot the lesson of that day, that mercy and honor, even when they seem foolish or costly, are the true sources of strength. And in their longhouse, around their fires, they told and retold the story of Aegir Ironsson, who refused to kill a sleeping dragon and discovered that his greatest enemy had been protecting his greatest treasure all along. As the seasons turned and the years passed, visitors would sometimes come to Ravenshollow seeking the truth behind the legends they had heard. They would find a peaceful village, nestled in a valley below a mountain, where, on certain clear nights, they could see a gentle glow emanating from a cave high up on the rocky slopes. And if they asked the villagers about their guardian dragon, they would be told that the greatest magic in the world is not fire or flight or the power to inspire fear. It is the love that binds families together and the mercy that chooses preservation over destruction. In the end, Aegir had saved more than a dragon's life when he lowered his sword that day in the cave. He had saved his brother, his village, and his own soul, proving that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through violence and conquest, but through the simple act of choosing compassion over cruelty, understanding over ignorance, and love over fear. Years flowed like rivers toward the sea, and the legend of the Dragon of Ravenshollow became one of the great tales told around fires throughout the Norse lands. Skalds would sing of Aegir Ironsson's mercy and the miraculous salvation that followed, though few truly believed that such wonders could exist in their harsh and practical world. But in the village that nestled beneath the watchful mountain, the people knew better. They had children who grew up unafraid, crops that flourished under mystical protection, and nights that passed peacefully while their guardian kept his eternal vigil. And sometimes, on the clearest evenings, when the northern lights danced across the sky, They would see two figures soaring together through the starlit darkness, one with the wings of legend, the other somehow keeping pace through bonds that transcended the physical world. Aegir lived to be an old man, respected throughout the region as both a wise leader and a warrior who had faced the impossible and emerged victorious through the strength of his convictions. When visitors asked him about his famous decision to spare the dragon, he would smile and look toward the mountain where a familiar light still glowed in the ancient cave. "I learned something that day," he would tell them, his eyes reflecting the wisdom of years and experience. "True strength is not measured by what you can destroy, but by what you choose to preserve. And the greatest treasures in this world are not gold or glory, but the bonds of love that connect us to those we hold dear, bonds so strong that not even death itself can break them." Dim and high in his mountain sanctuary, surrounded by the treasures of ages, but valuing none so much as the memories they shared, Ulf would stir in his dreams and smile, knowing that his brother's lesson had become legend and that their story would inspire others to choose mercy over might for generations yet to come. The bond between the brothers had indeed transcended death, transformation, and time itself, becoming a testament to the truth that love, once kindled, burns eternal, whether in the heart of a man or the soul of a dragon. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the mists of legend and the bonds of brotherhood that transcend even the boundaries between worlds. If this tale of Viking courage and mystical transformation moved you, please don't forget to like this video and share it with others who appreciate stories of honor, sacrifice, and the magic that lives in the human heart. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Whether you're in the frozen fjords of Scandinavia, the bustling cities of America, or anywhere else our Norse tales have found you. Your support helps us continue bringing these ancient stories to life for audiences around the world. Until next time, may your own bonds of love and loyalty burn as bright as dragon fire through whatever storms may come.